I think the future, though, is coaching. And I think coaching can kind of be the middle ground between the mental health approach and the purely religious approach. It can honor aspects of both without being either. And the reason I think it's the future is because I think that's what most young people need.
Welcome to the Future of Coaching webinar. I'm Kiva from Coacharya, and it's lovely to have you all join us today. As everyone is joining in, do share with us where you're joining us from, which part of the world, which country, which city. You could use the chat box to let us know. We have Yamini from our team as the chat box moderator. So Yamini, if you could say a quick hello to everyone. I think Yamini is joining us from Bangalore, India. I'm also in India. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes. Okay.
So am I from Bangalore, India, and Varun and Pranav both from California, Los Angeles at this point in time. 7 a.m. and it's 7:30 p.m. in India, and in between, wherever you guys are all from.
Good to see you all. Okay, so I am really delighted to welcome our guest for today's webinar, Dr. Varun Soni. Thank you so much for taking the time out, Dr. Varun. Today, he's going to be in a discussion with Coacharya co-founders, Ram and Pranav, on a very important topic and something which is almost a silent pandemic, which is the loneliness that our youth experience. Dr. Varun is the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life at the University of Southern California, where he also served as the inaugural Vice Provost of Campus Wellness and Crisis Intervention. He also teaches courses in leadership, lifestyle, redesign, and comparative religion. And his experiences working with youth and designing support for their well-being, I think, will be extremely valuable to all of us today. So thank you so much once again, Dr. Varun, for joining us, and we welcome you again. So over to you now, Ram and Pranav.
Thank you, Kiva. Sure. So I'm delighted to have my good friend, Dr. Varun Soni, on this webinar with us today, and talk about a very pertinent topic that he has first look at, given his the work that he does with USC. We'll just dive into it, Varun, if that's okay. What led you to this vocation in the first place?
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I've admired the work you do from afar for a long time, so it's really wonderful for me to join you. Welcome to all the guests who are here from all over the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. You know, Pranav, I guess for me, this is all very personal. I was born in India. I was born in Kanpur, but I moved to the United States when I was 6 weeks old. So I was essentially an ABCD, which what we call folks like me, American born confused Daisy. When I was growing up in the US, you know, my parents came after the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act. There weren't a lot of Indians in the public sphere. We had Deepak Chopra and we had Apu from The Simpsons, and that was it. Now there's so many Indians in every domain of life in the United States, but when I was growing up, we really didn't have any role models. And as a result, I think a lot of us were really struggling with identity. We didn't know what it meant to be Indian, and we didn't know what it meant to be an American. We weren't raised in India, and we were raised in the United States by parents who also were encountering the United States for the first time. So I think for my generation, there was a sense of psychological dislocation, neither here nor there. When we're in India, we didn't feel Indian. When we were in the US, we didn't feel American. And we existed in this liminal space where we really wrestled deeply with how we reconcile these identities. So for me, it was personal. The reason I got into the work that I ended up doing was because I wanted to figure out who I was. And for me, the way to figure out who I was to try to understand my Indian identity. And so I began to study India. I began to visit India, and eventually I began to study the religions of India. And as I did so, I soon discovered that in my study of religion, I was answering, or at least attempting to answer, existential questions more than just identity-based questions. Yes, part of it was trying to figure out what it meant to be Hindu or Indian or American. But at the end of it, it was really about what it meant to be human, fundamentally. And the questions that I was asking myself, I think, are the questions that all of us ask ourselves. Who am I? What does my life mean? How do I translate my values into action? How do I live a life of meaning and purpose? What is sacred to me? What's my North Star? What gets me up in the morning? Who do I love? How do I spend my time, et cetera? Those are the questions that are fundamentally human questions. Those are the questions that connect us with everyone who's ever lived across space and time. What it means to be human in a lot of ways is to ask these big questions of meaning and purpose and significance and authenticity. And so I came to, I think, this study of India because I was struggling with my own personal identity. But what ended up happening is that it opened me up to a very human conversation. And that allows me to do the work that I do today. I am the university chaplain of one of the largest private universities in the world. We have 50,000 students here, representing 140 countries, representing every faith tradition. I oversee more religious groups and chaplains than probably anyone in the world, certainly anyone in the country. And I do so in the middle of the most religiously diverse city in the world, which is Los Angeles. And the reason why I'm so excited to do this work is because I get to walk alongside young people who are asking the same questions I asked when I was their age, the questions of meaning and purpose, the questions of significance and authenticity, the questions of who am I and what does my life mean. And I do believe that the ages of, say, 18 to 26, which are the ages of most of our university students, is really the right time in one's life to ask these questions. It provides a foundation for the rest of one's life. And so a lot of our students come to USC to get degrees, to get better jobs, to make more money. But I think the real reason to come to USC is to ask the big questions, to start to develop loving, meaningful relationships, and to dream. And that's really what I want our students to do.
So you set the context of your audience at USC, 18 to 26, undergrad through grad school, I'm assuming. What are you seeing? What ails them in the context of loneliness?
Yeah. So, for me, it's kind of, I guess I'm old enough where I'm starting to see things generationally. And my own experience as someone who's Gen X, I found was different than my experience with millennials, Gen Y, who are the generation I encountered when I came in 2008. So when I first came and started this work in 2008, my students were millennials. There was hope and change in there. There was a financial crisis, so there was a little bit of, anxiety in the world about it. But my students were really hopeful. They were optimistic. They were excited. They wanted to go out and change the world. They believed they could be the change that they wanted to see in the world. They used to come to me and talk to me about their hopes and dreams, and that was it. It was all about hopes and dreams. It was a very optimistic, exciting time in the world, in my career, and on our campus. But about 5 years after that, at the time, it was almost in the exact moment that millennials started to leave college and post-millennials. So when Gen Y started to leave college and Gen Z started to come, I began to notice a very different kind of conversation. Instead of asking me about meaning, students began to talk about meaninglessness. Instead of asking me about hope, students began to talk about hopelessness. And instead of asking me how should they live, students increasingly began to ask me why should they live. At that point, I became very alarmed because what I realized quickly is that I wasn't just seeing something at USC. What I was seeing was a generational shift across the United States that all of my colleagues in higher education was seeing. And this was probably 2012, 2013. I began talking about what I was seeing publicly, which I described as a full-blown mental health crisis of anxiety, depression, and suicidality. And we've seen those numbers over the last 10 years increase. Ever since the release of the iPhone, suicidality on college campuses has doubled, self-harm has doubled, depression has doubled. And this has only been 10 or 12 years. And we've seen such a dramatic increase in how students describe their own well-being, a negative sort of development in how students describe their own well-being. As I began to talk with students deeper and deeper, I began to realize that there was one question they were asking me almost every day, every week that I had never heard in the first 5 years of my career. I never heard with millennials, but post-millennials kept asking me. And it was totally surprising to me. And that question was, how do I make friends? I never heard that question before. On a campus of 50,000 people, why are you asking me, the old man on the corner of campus, how to make friends? Just walk outside your dorm room and talk to 50,000 people from all over the world. And yet our post-millennials, Gen Z, the world's first ever digital natives, were asking me how to make friends. At that point, I began to realize that really underneath what I was seeing, the depression, the anxiety, the suicidality, was an epidemic of loneliness. Our students were really, really, really lonely. In the age of social media, they didn't feel connected at all. Actually, they felt antisocial. The promise of social media was connection. The reality was disconnection. And I think all of us felt that during the pandemic era. All of us got an experience of what Gen Z, post-millennials, had lived their whole life, which was an online social world in 2 dimensions, and the inability to feel seen and heard and honored in one's own being. And so I think that that to me was a big eye-opener, this loneliness issue. I wrote an op-ed for the LA Times called in 2019, before the pandemic, called "The Real Crisis on College Campuses: Loneliness." And I got emails from all over the world. I still get them saying, yes, what you're seeing is what we're seeing. Yes, what you see in the US is what we're seeing in India, we're seeing in China, we're seeing all over. It's not just an American phenomenon, it's a generational phenomenon of loneliness. And just earlier this semester, 4 years after my op-ed, the Surgeon General of the United States, Indian man, Vivek Murthy, another Indian American role model for our young people, said that his big concern from a public health lens was loneliness, and that his big concern for young people is loneliness. And he thinks that we should be reframing loneliness as a massive public health issue, because being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and not being lonely can increase your lifespan by 15 years. And so this is an issue. The Cigna, which is the big healthcare company, said that the loneliest people in the United States right now are 18 to 22-year-olds. Historically, the loneliest people were older people. And we know, if you asked any professor of geriatrics, that one of the leading contributors of sort of an early death is extreme loneliness. So we've traditionally been concerned about extreme loneliness for older Americans. Now, the loneliest people in the United States are college kids, 18 to 22-year-olds. And so this, to me, was the big shift between Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. This rise of loneliness at a time when students should feel more connected than they've ever felt before.
So this is an interesting thought, but we have generations before us that have been ostensibly through more hardship than we have. We have the baby boomers and their parents who went through world wars and depression, the Great Depression, economic strife. For the most part, Gen Xers, millennials and millennials have had an easy go at it, with the exception of a few hiccups here and there with COVID, et cetera. What do you see as the causes for this particular generation?
Yeah, this is what I stay awake trying to think about. You're absolutely right. It's hard to imagine. Honestly, I know if you just doom scroll your phone, you would think this is the worst time in human history to live. But if you have an understanding of history, you realize this is actually the best time in human history to live. I can't think of a single time I would rather be alive than right now. Our students don't feel that, even though I think that's the reality. And so you're right. There is a disconnect between the hardships people have historically gone through and the resilience that's created versus what I think students are going through now. There's seems to be maybe a lack of resilience, or almost a type of fragility that we're seeing in terms of encountering the challenges of the world. I think that, and so how is this possible? You've hit the nail on the head. It's true. Our students now are more depressed than young people were during World War II, and more anxious than young people were during the Great Depression. So how is this possible? Now, here's my take. It might be contrarian. I have a point of view. It might be, not everyone's going to agree with me here, but this is what I see happening from where I sit. I think there's 2 things that are happening at the same time for young people that have never happened before in human history. And young people are a guinea pig of these 2 trends in a way that we don't understand, quite frankly, what the impact will be. And so we don't have a longitudinal data study to sort of think about what the impact of these trends are, but that story is being told in real time, and it's almost entirely negative. The first trend, in my opinion, now I have a point of view here. The first trend, in my opinion, is the loss of religion. In 1950, in the United States, 2% of Americans were not religiously affiliated. Today, in the United States, 25% of Americans are not religiously affiliated. That's the largest group of religious people in the United States. The biggest growing group of religious people in the United States are those who are not affiliated with religion. But for young people, my first year students here, it's 51%. So 51% of our students are not affiliated with religion compared to just 5% of their grandparents. That's a pretty dramatic, that's an incredibly dramatic story in American religious history, the likes of which we've never seen. And the United States is moving the way of Europe. It's going to be a largely secular place. And my concern with that is that nothing has replaced it. And so religion has historically provided protective factors for people. It provides a sense of meaning and purpose and community, an ethical framework, a song to live by, a story to live by, an ethic of compassion, and a sense of a reality that's greater than yourself, an ability to mark life stages that are important to you. We don't have anything, practices for contemplation, for prayer, for transformation, for growth, for creative expression. We don't have anything to replace religion. It is the primordial language of what it means to be human. I don't think of religion as an opportunity to think about what it means to be God. I think of religion as an opportunity to think about what it means to be human. What it means to be human is to do all those things, to have meaning, purpose, community, a sense of awe, transcendence, a contemplative life and practice, etc. Now, we don't need religion to do any of that, but historically, religion has been the place where all of that has resided until we get to another structure that provides the same protective factors that religion has. My concern is that we've pulled the rug from under young people who no longer have those protective factors, and that the loss of those protective factors has created an epidemic of anxiety. 65% of college students are so anxious that they have trouble functioning. These are high-performing type A students across the country. We don't send our students to college so that they're anxious and depressed and suicidal. We send them to college so that they can thrive and flourish and live their dreams. So there's a massive disconnect between the dream of going to college and the nightmare of being there. So I think the first thing is the loss of religion. And of course, I'm the dean of religious life. I have a point of view here. Okay, I'm not saying that. The second thing, I think, which you have to think about as a corollary to that, because they're happening at the same time, is the rise of social media. And this is a generation that has that's a digital native generation. This is a generation that's entirely been born and bred in a social environment, online social environment, where they're constantly comparing their real lives to the Instagrammed, curated lives of everyone else. And they feel terrible about themselves because they feel like everyone's figured it out but them. Everyone is an imposter, or everyone belongs but them. I'm the only imposter here. I'm the admissions mistake. What am I doing here? Everyone got invited to the party but me. Everyone's in Europe on vacation but me, And so there's this constant kind of negative reinforcement that's happening in online social media by design, by the way. These social media companies hire very brilliant social scientists and others to create these sites that keep us outraged and that keep us anxious, because that's what keeps us coming back. And so it's entirely by design that our students are feeling anxious. And so you've replaced the protective factor of religion with the exacerbating factor of social media, which it provides no protective factors. And so the thing that might have allowed students to feel as though they had a place to stand in the world has been replaced by the thing that is designed to keep students feeling anxious and outraged. And then we wonder what's going on here. Why are students so depressed and anxious? Well, that's why, that's why. I had a conversation with Sean Parker, who is one of the founders of Facebook, and he told me that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't talk to him anymore because he accused Mark Zuckerberg of destroying the mental health of a generation through Facebook. And what Sean Parker told me was that when they designed Facebook, it was to bring people together. It was to make them feel connected, to make them feel seen and heard. But what changed was the advent of the like button on the iPhone, where Facebook just became a dopamine hit or a rush and a new drug. We tell our young people, don't do drugs, don't do alcohol, don't smoke cigarettes, be careful how you use drugs, make sure that if you use them responsibly. If social media is a drug, why aren't we doing that with young people? Why are we just handing them this thing that has caused immense psychological harm without any training or any warning or any thing at all, quite frankly. And so I think these two things have caused an epidemic of loneliness, alienation, disconnection, in a way that we should all be really alarmed. The rise of social media and the loss of religion. So the loss of a protective factor, which has been replaced by something that's an aggravating factor, essentially, for a young person's well-being. And so now, sorry to keep going, well, last point. Now I don't talk about a mental health crisis anymore. 10 years ago, everyone thought I was an alarmist by talking about a mental health crisis. They were like, oh, you're overdoing it. Now there's not a single person who works in higher education who would not say that we have a mental health crisis. 80% of college and university presidents say their number one concern is not fundraising, not academic freedom, not federal funding, not research dollars, not tenure. Their number one concern is the mental health of their students and faculty, right? And so now everyone agrees with this, but I'm no longer talking about a mental health crisis. Now I'm talking about what I call a spiritual health crisis, because I no longer believe that the crisis young people going through are actually crises of anxiety, depression, and suicidality. I now believe they are crises of meaning and purpose and human connection that manifest as anxiety, depression, and suicidality. But at their core, they're meaning-making and relationship building challenges. And if we don't address the core issues of meaning making and relationship building, you're never going to address the downstream impact of the downstream manifestations of suicidality, anxiety, and depression.
Your thoughts are so provoking in a good way. And the chat sort of buzzing a little bit here, and then Ram can check in with us with some of his.
Maybe I can just say one thing here. Maybe I can just say one thing here too. I don't mean, I'm not trying to be an evangelist for religion. I know religion has caused great harm to a lot of people. And I know why young people reject religion, because for young people, religion is anti-LGBTQ, it's misogynistic, it's casteist, it's religious violence, it's terrorism, it's covering up child abuse. Religion says one thing and does something else. I understand that. So I'm not trying to say that religion has been a force for good for all people at all time. But what I do think as human beings is we need something sacred in our life. We need something sacred. That can be cricket. That can be comic books. That can be seva. That can be, parenthood. But we listen, there's a lot of stuff that keeps us up at night, right? But what gets us up in the morning, right? What's our true north? What's our North Star? What's sacred to us? We might not need religion. We might not need God. 600 million Buddhists are not theistic, but they're religious, right? So I'm not saying you need God, you need religion per se, but you need something sacred as a human being. I think that's fundamental. And the more we lose that, the more we lose a sense of what it means to be human.
And thanks for defining that more specifically. It is, even for me. So we're talking about one of the interventions that are possible in this pandemic of loneliness, religion. And perhaps spirituality as a version of it. But for those of us who are not necessarily embedded in an organized religion, can you go into a little more depth about what you just started here, which is how do we channel that? How do we channel that mindset?
Yeah. So I'm going to socialize something I haven't really talked about publicly, but I'm writing a book about it. So I've been thinking about this. What if, how do you build your own religion? Right? That's my thing, because 51% of our students don't have religion. I'm not trying to say this is the religion that you should have. I'm trying to say, here are the tools that you need to make meaning in your life. So how do you build a religion for yourself if you're not formally affiliated? And I call it the 4 T's. The first T is truth, or telos. What is your North Star? What's sacred to you? What gets you up in the morning? What do you believe? I think we have the answer to all these 4 questions, they're the 4 questions, the 4 T's, will change over the course of your life. But I think the questions remain. We're all looking for something permanent. The answers won't be permanent because we change. The answer of what is my truth at age 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 and 30 and 40. And unfortunately for my wife, I can keep going with those numbers. For me, those answers change at different ages because I've changed at different ages. So, but the questions remain. So the questions are the anchors for our life, not the answers themselves. So the first question, I think, is what is your truth? The first T is truth. The second T is time. How do you spend your time? We know that with the pandemic, our time is limited. We know that even if we live 90 years, we die young. The universe is 14 billion years old. No matter how long we live, our time here is really limited. We all die young. And so how do we spend our time gives us a sense of what really matters to us. And if we're spending our time doing things that don't really matter to us, then we should probably reevaluate that. I think the reason we have a great resignation in the United States, 40% of Americans want to leave their job in a post-pandemic period, is because people got to spend their time in a different way. And they began to realize that actually their time is more important than money. We always say time is money. No, it's not. Time is way more important than money. You know, time is the thing you can't make more of. Once you lose it, you lose it. Like money, you can lose and make. Time, you cannot make. You know, as you get older, you realize your real asset is time, and that, you know, if you really love someone, it's easier as you get older to spend money on them. It's harder to spend time with them, but the real gift is time. And what I want young people to realize who are so obsessed with being cash billionaires is that they have something way more valuable than being cash billionaires. They are time billionaires. That means they have more than 1 billion seconds left in their life. No young person intuitively would change that with Warren Buffett, who is not a time billionaire, but a cash billionaire. And Warren Buffett would change places with any of those people, any of our young people, to be a time billionaire as opposed to a cash billionaire. And so intuitively, I think people realize that, even though it's not articulated that way. So the first T is truth. What is your truth? The second T is your time. How do you spend your time? The third T is tribe or team. Those are your people. Who do you love? Who do you spend your time with? I mean, at the end of the day, what makes us feel like we've lived a life worth living more than anything else is how deep our loving relationships are, period. That's what the Harvard Grant Study taught us. There was a longitudinal study at Harvard called the Grant Study. They followed undergraduates for 75 years. They studied every aspect of their life in terms of what leads to human happiness and flourishing. And their main takeaway after 20 million spent and 75 years studying was that the number one thing that makes you feel as though you lived a life worth living at the end of your life is not your salary, your status, your grades, the school you went to, your height, your weight, none of the things that we tell our students at university, none of the things that the American dream tells Americans about what causes happiness. The thing that made you feel as though you lived your life in a meaningful way was how deep were your loving relationships over the course of your life. That's it. How deep was your love? That's what the Bee Gees told us. You know, all you need is love. That's what the Beatles told us. Like, that's it. So your tribe, who are the people you spend time with? I often tell students, you know, you may have 1,000 friends online or 100,000 friends online, but who are the 3 people in real life who have your back, ride or die, no matter what? That's all we need. In the 1990s, there was a study called the Dunbar study, and they came up with the Dunbar number, which basically is you can only have 150 relationships in your life, no matter how many friends you have online. So who are those people, and why are they your people, and how do you honor them as your people, right? We're so concerned often about what people we don't know, who we don't know think about. We're so concerned about sorry, let me try this again. We are so concerned about what others think about us, even if we don't know them. And yet, oftentimes we treat the people we love the worst. And so why is that? You know, I think thinking about who your tribe is fundamental to the human experience, because what it means to be human is to be in tribe or family or community or kin or whatever it is. It's to be in small, intimate social groups. And the last T is transcendence. What are the moments that take your breath away? You know, there's a cheesy bumper sticker in LA. It's not how many breaths you take, but how many moments you have that take your breath away. I believe that. I believe we have to have some experiences of a reality greater than ourselves. If we think we are the center of the universe all the time, then we're going to feel less than, you know, we're not going to feel connected. We're not going to feel like we're flourishing. We're going to feel like we're all alone. But if we realize that we're part of a larger whole, and if we have moments of reflection, contemplation, or awe, I think awe is fundamental to the human experience, then suddenly we're going to have a more spiritually enriched life. And so you don't need God for those 4 T's. You don't need religion for those 4 T's. But I think you need to ask and answer those questions in order to think about how you live a life of flourishing and thriving. Truth, time, transcendence, and tribe.
The 4 T's.
Yeah.
We are being asked when your book is out and what the name of it is. If you're able to
That's
say.
what my wife asks me every day.
Hopefully
soon.
yeah, stay tuned on Varun's profile, and I'm sure we will also publish something about the release when it comes about. So the issue of time is interesting, especially when we think of how little time you have left, and probably less than we think there actually is. For example, in the next, say, 10 years, I may have 10 more times to see my parents. You know, when I think of it in that sense, because I see them once a year, that's not a lot. That's not a lot more times. And Ram will be the first to acknowledge his deep thoughts on mortality. I also saw him smiling at the Dunbar study because he just wrote something about it. You wanna go into that, Ram?
It's very interesting. And I quoted something from Dunbar, which says that how many friendships is love worth? So the time that you invest in love is going to take you away from the time that you would be investing in developing relationships. And that's a fantastic kind of a concept, which no one ever thinks about. Yeah. So
I think we should think about. Sorry, Ram. Yeah, I love that. I think we should think about our relationships in the way that we think about our work. Young people they'll do anything to get an A and they'll do anything to get a job, but they won't do anything to maintain a friendship, which is way more important than an A or a job. It's just the socialization around that. And so what if what I encourage our students to do is keep an internal resume that only you see, that measures a different kind of success. Your resume is an external document. Your resume is, here's me checking the boxes of the world. Okay, I need a degree. Here's my degree. I need work experience. Here's my work experience. I need skills. Here are my skills. I need a foreign language. Here it is. So it's the world dictating what is success, and me telling a story based on the categories of what the world will evaluate me by. But what about an internal resume that only I see, where I define success for myself? And that internal resume could be about relationships, about joy, about adventure, about failure, even that I had so much courage that I tried to do something that I probably knew I knew I was going to fail at, but still did it. Like, why is that not a kind of success? Why is it only what other people tell us is success, our metric? Why can't we determine our own metrics of success? I think we can, but we need a way to document that, to honor it, to make it real. And I think we do that by building an internal resume. And the first thing I would put on an internal resume is relationships, because we know that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And totally, absolutely. And the kind of thing that you said, one of the things I'll certainly quote you on is, we treat people who love us with disdain and disrespect, but follow and honor those who, I don't know, treat us like God knows what, scum.
Yeah,
And that's the truth, unfortunately.
Social media has made it worse, and then you get into the great capitalist paradox of, we spend our lives working a job we don't like in order to buy things we don't need, in order to impress people we don't know. And there's got to be more to life than that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So yeah, the second half of this talk that we're having, let's move into what we do here for work, which is coaching. And many of the folks in our audience are practicing coaches. How, you mentioned this earlier, how can coaching be an intervention? You mentioned time, friendships, spirituality, religion. What about coaching? What can we do?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while. I think because we've framed what young people are going through as a mental health epidemic, which is something, I said too, 10 years ago, the solution for everything that ails young people is counseling. And so what I see at universities is we just keep hiring more and more counselors. And unfortunately, we can't keep up with the demand. 15 years ago at USC, we had 20 counselors, and there was probably a 2 or 3 week wait to see someone. Now we have 80 counselors, 80. and there's still probably 2 or 3 weeks to see someone. So we're even in 15 years, we have 4x the counselors, but the demand is probably the same. Is increasing at the same rate. So there's no way any university can keep up with the demand for mental health services, especially because our students are more therapy literate. They grew up often with therapists. And so when they come to university, they're looking for that too. I think historically before counseling, the solution was what I do, chaplaincy. It was all about, spiritual approaches of, the priest or the rabbi or the imam or, the pundit or whatever. So we went from, kind of chaplaincy, spiritual kind of counseling to mental health counseling, which is where we are now. I think the future, though, is coaching. And I think coaching can kind of be the middle ground between the mental health approach and the purely religious approach. It can honor aspects of both without being either. And the reason I think it's the future is because I think that's what most young people need. I don't think that most young people who go to counseling are in full-blown crisis. I think what they really need is to be seen and heard. Honestly, they don't need to be judged. They need to be seen and heard. And I think they need some help around strategizing for the things we're talking about. They think that either you have, young people think either I'm popular or I'm not popular. Either I'm spiritual or I'm not spiritual. Either I'm successful or I'm not successful. Either I'm grateful or I'm not grateful. What they don't realize is that there are practices and tools for being all those things. Young people will go to the gym without any stigma. They understand there are physical health practices that they should do, even if they're not feeling physically ill or sick. You don't go to the gym because you're feeling physically terrible. You go to the gym so that you don't feel physically terrible. There's no stigma around that. But yet there is stigma around mental health or spiritual health or emotional health practices that students can do in the absence of being in crisis in order to prevent that crisis. And I think we need to normalize those kinds of practices in the way that we've done with physical health. What is the mental health gym? What does mental floss look like as opposed to just dental floss, right? I think that coaching is the place for that to happen, because religion is a bad word for a lot of young people, and counseling has, I think, quite frankly, counseling doesn't have at least in a university setting, counseling is really an assessment. You can only see a counselor for so many times, and then you're off on your own anyway. And counseling often is addressing what you're feeling at that moment, but maybe not providing the tools around time management or relationship building or awe or thinking about people in your life and what they mean. And so I think coaching is the way, honestly. I think every young person at some point should have a coach in a way that and here this is why I like the term coacharya. In India, we have a guru, and in the US, people don't understand what that means. There's a negative association with a guru. But in the US, people are completely fine with having a baseball coach to get better at baseball. They're completely fine with having a math tutor to get better at math. They're completely fine with having a boss at work who mentors you in the job. And so when you explain to people who aren't as familiar with the concept of a guru, that a guru is a spiritual coach. And if you want to progress on a spiritual path, you need a coach, just like if you want to progress on an athletic or academic path, you need a coach, right? Then I think that connotation changes. And so I think part of the challenge around coaching is around nomenclature, around what it actually means to be a coach, around using the positive associations that Americans have with coaching in other domains in order to bring it into lifestyle work, lifestyle redesign, time management, et cetera. And I think the biggest opportunity for coaching in the future is 18 to 26-year-olds. I mean, and it's not a coach for people who are in crisis. It's a coach for people so they don't go into crisis.
Makes sense. So I'm going to channel a question that I think is on everyone's mind here. We both have kids, young kids in single digits. My 9-year-old is already in therapy. What is the age? When should coaching start?
Well,
should start that early.
I think there's two things here, coaching and parenting, right? And so I think parenting, has some aspect of this. I think what it means to be a parent is to try and empower our kids to think about the things that we're talking about, the things that matter: love, joy, awe, adventure, service, compassion, etc. So that's parenting. That I think is different than coaching. I'm not sure what the right answer is for the coaching question, but my sense is that anyone who is old enough to be, seeing a therapist is probably old enough to be seeing a coach. It just that person just has to have some kind of expertise around it. So we have a lot of people, my wife's a pediatrician. Of course, she's an expert in the health of young people. And there are therapists who are experts in adolescent therapy. And I'm a university chaplain. My expertise is college students. I wouldn't do as well in hospital chaplain situation or R&B chaplain situation. I'm not trained in that way, end of life care, et cetera. So I think that as we think about a new industry in coaching, there's probably a vertical there for young people, for adolescent coaching or what have you, to develop the best practice expertise around social emotional development and learning that is already in other fields like child psychology and early childhood education and pedagogy, and extrapolate them into coaching. But I think the important thing for coaching is to be proactive about giving people a opportunity to be a participant in their own life story as opposed to an observer. I feel sometimes with other kinds of counseling, young people feel as though they're not participants in their own life. They're just recipients of whatever life has. I don't want any young person to feel helpless in their life. And this is my point of view. I want people to feel empowered to live their dreams, especially my students who come to university to do that very thing. If you leave USC and you feel helpless leaving, then I don't think we've done a very good job, honestly. So I think whatever the coaching is at whatever age, there should be practices that come out of it, or tools, or let's do a chart on time management. Let's do a chart on what's important to you. Let's think about the relationships in your life. Let's have a gratitude practice that you build into your daily life. Deepak Chopra told me there were 6 aspects for well-being. 3 are physical, 3 are spiritual, emotional. And they're kind of what you would expect. 3 physical ones are sleep, diet, exercise, and nutrition. And the 3 other ones are, more spiritual, are a contemplative practice like meditation, an emotional intelligence practice like gratitude, and communing with nature, which is something, a reality greater than yourself. So what if you had a coach who kind of helped you think about those 6 things in your life? Like, that's not counseling, that's not chaplaincy, right? But that is coaching, and that is empowering for people to be able to create a framework for those things, to be able to measure those things, to take inventory of those things, and to be held accountable for those things in a way that's not judgmental, not negative, that doesn't make people feel disempowered, right? And so I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I think the future is not counseling. We can't keep up with the demand, and counseling is not an upstream intervention with the way it is in higher ed. It's a downstream intervention. We only get to the students in counseling who are in full-blown crisis. But what about all the students? But what are we doing to mitigate the flow of crisis downstream? We have to get students out of the river, but we should also make sure students aren't getting into the river, right? Otherwise, we're just reacting, and we can't continue to react with the numbers as egregious as they are now. We have to be upstream proactive. I think coaching is the way to make sure students don't get into that river.
So we talked, I had one point, and then Ram, you can just, it's actually a comment, not a question. So I'll just say it. Varun, at USC, a private institution where the attendees have the funds and the budgets to accommodate all types of support. It's one world. And our goal here at Kacharya is to democratize coaching in whatever fashion that we can. How do we serve those that are underprivileged, who cannot afford the kind of value that you provide to USC?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The university does a good job providing support for all students, even though our students come from all backgrounds, and we do have incredible socioeconomic diversity here, and you give out more financial aid than any university in the world, probably, certainly in the country. So I think that, even though not all of our students might be able to avail themselves of coaching or counseling or chaplaincy before or even after they're at USC, while they're at SC, while they're part of this network, they have those resources. So part of it could be thinking about the networks that people belong to. Maybe it's a school network and you work with the school. Maybe it's an after school network and you work with them. Like in the US, it would be the Boys and Girls Club, right? Maybe it's other nonprofits who are already working with people who might come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and you work with them. I don't think you need to rebuild the wheel. I think you probably need to collaborate with people who are on the front line of this work. And here's, I think, part of it, which isn't going to be, I think for people our age, it's not an answer that's going to sit well, but it's something we have to wrestle with, which is, what is the future of AI in terms of coaching? That is the democratization of the field. The technology might not be there yet. It might be there soon. What Deepak Chopra told me was that he created a wellness app, an AI bot, essentially, named Piwi, Piwi. I forget exactly what it stands for, but the goal of Piwi was to intervene in suicidality. And he says Piwi as a bot has already intervened in over 5,000 suicide ideations with young people. And the reason why is it can scale. It can have 20 million conversations at once, but young people trust the bot more than they trust humans. Why? Because the bot does not judge them. The bot does not judge them. And in an age of social media where you're constantly being judged and you're judging yourself, the bot is a non-judgmental opportunity in a way that human beings might judge you. Plus, the bot checks in on you. The bot will ask you, how did your test go? How's your relationship? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? The bot will show up for you in a way that humans won't. And so in the age where we're dealing with an unprecedented crisis of digital natives, I thought that technology was always the problem. But if we're going to be realistic, I think both things can be true, where technology is the problem, but maybe technology can be part of the solution too. And if that is the case, then we all have to think about, what that means for the field, because we're only 2 or 3 years away probably from AI technology that, can be helpful if it's deployed in the right way. And I think that ultimately will be the thing that democratizes this, where everyone has a coach in their pocket.
I really like that, Varun. Everyone has a coach in their pocket, and it's absolutely brilliant. And in fact, one of the things that we've been talking about working on is what Pranav mentioned as a democratization of coaching. How do we reach it to the underprivileged? And very certainly, I've been, let's say, put it more playing with ChatGPT, and I found it exciting, inspiring. There's no question of AI good or bad. If somebody thinks it's bad, I think they need to open their minds. How best can we use them? The same way, like as you said earlier, religion can be good or bad. I mean, religion, if shorn of adultery and stuff and rigids and commercialism and all that stuff, religion can be very spiritual, can be very helpful. And even social media can be, if it is in some way controlled to service. But what I'm particularly interested in, given Pracharya being a coaching company, and of course we have a lot of people who we train from counselors to coaching, there's a fine difference there. The counselors focus more in terms of listening to people, allowing them to vent. There is no specificity in terms of the creation of awareness generally and a future point. So when you say, which really gladdens our heart, that coaching is the way, the upstream, what needs to be done, what would you actually sort of split it into some elemental kind of factors that where coaching can be helpful, and in what way?
Yeah. I think it'll be helpful for different people in different situations at different age groups. For me, if I'm dealing with young people who are struggling, I would think about coaching as kind of a school of life. In India, we've had this idea of a school of life. I think Vivekananda talked about it, and Yogananda talked about it. And, in some way, Shanti Niketan, the Tagore school, was kind of a school of life, which expands this idea of, what does it mean to be a successful human being? I think quite frankly, and I'm partly to blame because I've spent my whole life in higher education. I think we have a fairly myopic view of schooling in the United States in terms of just professional development, but it used to also be, at least colleges also used to be focused on the liberal arts. The liberal arts were the questions of the humanities. Who am I and what does my life mean? Now our schools are mostly pre-professional because they're expensive. It costs $95,000 a year to go to a school like USC. And so students are asking themselves, what degree do I need to get to pay my debt? Not what do I want to study to learn about myself, right? And so I think with the loss of liberal arts and the loss of religion, we've lost the school of life opportunity to think about our lives in holistic ways, connected, integrated, spiritual ways. And so I think coaching can have some of that. It can provide a scientific framework for spiritual questions. So the questions of meaning and purpose and connection and transcendence are spiritual, but what is the template for that? Maybe there's a chart, maybe there's a path, maybe there's an equation, maybe there's a checklist, maybe there's some way that we can take this ancient wisdom and put it into digestible pieces for students to be able to engage it across their lifespan. What's happened in the West is these great spiritual practices like yoga and meditation have been secularized out of the Vedic context and offered as well-being initiatives. And there's a lot of people who are very critical of that. Academically, I think I would be critical of that, but practically I can't be, because people tell me that yoga and meditation have saved their life, even if they know nothing about Hinduism and Buddhism. I think every tradition now should be mining itself for spiritual practices that can be relevant to any person, regardless of their belief system, and to present those in ways that are digestible. And they don't just have to be contemplative practice. It could be about how do we make ritual something that, we all have rituals in our life, but we don't have an intention around it. We all tell stories about ourselves. We all have a mythology about ourselves, but we don't have an intention about it. We all have a tribe, but we don't have an intention about it. We all have some sense of what a greater universe, but maybe we don't have an intention about it. So maybe coaching is putting intentionality behind the things we're all asking ourselves, the things that religion has historically helped us answer, but that now there's very little space to talk about in society. You can't talk about it at university. You can't talk about it there's no religion. Social media is toxic. So we're even having these conversations about meaning and purpose and thriving and flourishing and what the science of a spiritual life could look like. I think coaching can be the great space for the most critical conversations in a way that doesn't turn people off. If I talk about religion, I'm going to lose half the people immediately. If I talk about mental health counseling, I'll probably lose some of the people immediately, right? But if I talk about coaching, I don't think I really lose anyone, because coaching has a positive association in the United States. And it doesn't have the same baggage that religion and psychology have. And it doesn't have the same antagonism towards each other that religion and psychology have. And so I think this is the great space here. And think about, religion is the great enterprise of the human experience, and psychology is the major field in the world right now. And so what we're thinking about is a third space for these massive communities that may be losing their way with the people they're trying to serve, right? I keep coming back to Deepak, but I've been stealing from him my whole life, so why stop now? So last time I saw Deepak, he told me there were 5 crises in the world today, 4 of which everyone seems to know about, which are war, justice, health, and sustainability. But he said the 5th crisis is the most important crisis, and without addressing it, we can't address any of the other crises, the other 4 crises. And not everyone can address the other 4 crises, but all of us can be part of addressing the 5th crisis. And the 5th crisis in the world today, he said, is a crisis of joy. And so I think, what can coaching do? It can over-index joy. I think we have to be unapologetic about joy at this point. We have to over-index joy. That doesn't mean we always have to be happy, but we have to have an aspiration to joy. And I think that's a space where coaching can be incredibly helpful for students. That coaching can have a point of view, that actually the point of view is joy. And how do we over-index and optimize joy?
Absolutely. I mean, as coaches, we are completely delighted to agree with you. I'm just looking at a hypothetical situation, Varun. Earlier, when we talked about this personally, individually, you said you're looking at coaching on demand, for example, for the students to be available, just like on call, and like you said now, coach in a pocket. Yes, but equally, at least in Kocharya, we believe and we have started working towards self-coaching as a starting point. If at some point in time, can we get people to start coaching themselves using a particular process, like you said, intentionality. Anything that we start with in coaching is with an agreement in terms of what is the intent, what is the desire, the outcome, etc. And then you explore why it's valuable and what is it that may block it, and then arrive at a solution and awareness. So coaching is an awareness creation process. Now, that is something, in my own experience, you can really work with. Pranav talked about his daughter. I started talking to her in my walks with her at one point in time when she was 4 or 5. And the kind of question that she asked, which created for me, I had to grow up to her level to be able to answer them. And so kids at any age can become aware, and they can create awareness in other people as well. So if supposing one were to look at something like coaching circles, which let's say, rather than, because for affordability and even for underprivileged later for us to scale it up, is that something that might work, where we work with this basic principle that you outlined? How do you create intentionality? How do you create this exploration to awareness and so on, so people can arrive with, for themselves, out of their own DNA and nature, what's best for them? Is that something we can work directionally?
Yeah, I think so. I would hope so. I think two things have to happen. You have to be the right age probably to sort of self-coach, have to have a certain amount of life experience to be able to do it effectively. And you have to have a certain amount of literacy as well. And so I think what we're really talking about is literacy around coaching. And there is some now, there used to be historically literacy around chaplaincy. People know what a chaplain was, not so much anymore. Now there's literacy around counseling. Most people know what a counselor is. I think that creating a literacy around coaching in a way that also creates the field, it's a new enough field that creating a literacy is also creating the field. You're creating the points of the discourse. You're shaping it in real time. You're not responding to, like chaplaincy. It's hard to redefine a chaplain when chaplains have been around for hundreds of years, but you, in creating that literacy, define what a coach is. And in creating that literacy, part of the definition of coaching is self-empowerment. And so how do you coach yourself, essentially? Yeah. That's, I hate to keep coming back to this, but I am the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life. That's kind of a spiritual approach, which is like the real guru is the guru inside of you, or the real empowerment is self-empowerment. Or if you believe in God, real God, to find God is to find the God inside of you. That's namaste. The divinity within me acknowledges and salutes the divinity with you. And so if you're taking a kind of a quasi-spiritual approach, it's like the real coach is the coach inside of you. And the guru gets you to the guru inside of you. The coach gets you to the coach inside of you. But the guru or the coach is only the raft to get you to the other side. The Buddha said, once you get to the other side, you don't need the raft anymore. The raft has served its purpose. And so if the coach is the means to the end, not the end in and of itself, the end in and of itself is self-empowerment, self-reflection, self-discovery, self-awareness, self-coaching, then I think that has to be a story that you tell as you increase literacy around the field.
Thanks a lot.
Brilliant.
Pranav, you're almost on top of the hour.
Yeah.
And Kiva wanted to finish off something. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you, Varun. I think a lot of us here are going to have some existential conversations with ourselves. And your insights were so significant for us. I am going to transition over to Kiva, who wants to actually segue into a topic that's relevant, a youth leadership program that Kocharya is hosting. Go ahead, Kiva.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Varun. Firstly, I think this was an extremely valuable, very, very insightful webinar today, from talking about the internal resume to really working towards the crisis of joy. I think a lot of takeaways for all of us today. The chat box is buzzing. So thank you so much. Talking about what Pranav just mentioned, so we at Kocharya have been planning an intervention for youth, something around developing youth leadership, enabling their leadership through coaching. And I think Ram has always stressed on seeing how we create a space where students or children or youth have an opportunity to really find themselves, understand who they really are. And I think, like Dr. Varun said, in their own ways, find something that's joyful for them and adds to their well-being. So in the next few days, we're going to be launching the Kocharya Coaching Circles of Change, which is our initiative to encourage youth to adopt coaching practices to enable their leadership and to have a better well-being lifestyle for themselves. So you'll hear about all of this in the next few days. We'll update you, and we'll also have a lot of volunteering opportunities for people from the community. So stay tuned, and we'll keep you updated about all that's happening at Kocharya for youth. So anything else, Pranav, Ram, that you'd like to add?
Thanks a lot, Varun. Thank you for absolutely insightful, tremendous learning conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Pranav. Thanks, Keva.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. All the very best. Bye.